know about you, but I'm all about good vibes. Good vibes make life so much better. Yeah, and those good vibes that I'm talking about here aren't just the metaphorical vibrations we often refer to. I'm also referring to vibration therapy, which can be used to change numerous physiologic aspects of how the human body functions. Now, if you get these non metaphorical good vibrations on you, you might just be on the path towards helping your body function in ways that promote physical healing, recovery, and even improve your physical performance. So, if that sounds interesting to you, then stick around as I take you into a world where tiny oscillations can make big differences. So, let's get after it. All right. Well, welcome back, everyone, to the Strength Resurgence podcast. This is episode number 3, where we're going to be talking all about vibration therapy, which some really interesting stuff that they're finding in the research these days with this. And really, we're going to tie this all into best practices and how you can get the most out of it, assuming that this is even worth doing in the first place. So, in the name of a podcast, it's all about preventing injuries and helping you heal up from aches and pains and, kind of living that stronger, more physically robust lifestyle. This is an interesting topic to get into. So, that's what we're going to be diving in here today as we go along. So, let's get right into it here. And just real quick, if you don't know who I am, I want to let you know that my name's Jim and I'm a physical therapist. I'm someone who's really passionate about what it is I do. Pretty geeky about what I do too, I suppose. And I think we all got to be a geek about something in life. So this podcast is one of my many pursuits for taking the knowledge and the expertise that I've been formally granted over the years through education, but also through a couple of decades now of anecdotal experiences and trying to give this back all in a way that helps others out there, including you, live stronger, more physically active, pain-free lifestyles. So that being said, my name's Jim and I love what I do and want to thank you for being here today because, again, there's a few million podcasts out there to listen to. And the fact that you're listening to me is really, really cool. So thanks very much. I appreciate that. We'll try and give you the best bang for your buck with your time spent in this podcast. And just to let you know a little bit more about who I am, because it's always worth getting to know each other a little bit, I'll give you a fun fact about me here. My favorite podcast of all time is a podcast called No Such Thing as a Fish. Perfect blend of learning some interesting facts along the way, presented in really comedic ways as well too, just for great podcasters having a lot of fun sharing some different insight in the podcast episode. So No Such Thing as a Fish. Great episode if you want to check, or great podcast if you want to check it out. Definitely my favorite podcast. So yeah, that's one interesting fact about me. You listen to a few more episodes, you learn a few more things about me as well, and that's always a good thing, right? So anyways, here we go. So what's in this episode with this whole vibration therapy thing? Well, in this episode, we're going to be talking about what vibration therapy is, because that's a pretty important thing that I guess we'll have to figure out here if we're going to be talking about it for a little bit. So we're going to talk about what it is, and then we're going to talk about the effects of how this even works and what it's supposed to do. And then we're going to talk about, does it even work for that matter? And we'll pick it apart, break it down a bit more, where we'll talk about vibration parameters. So what are the components that goes into this whole vibration thing to help people move better, get out of pain, all that type of stuff. Again, if it even works. We're going to talk about local versus whole body vibration because there's a couple of different ways that we can implement all of this. And then from there, we're going to talk about the scientific findings, really geeking out here for a little bit about what the research is finding. And this is where, again, we'll get into a little bit of the weeds here today. I won't go terribly far into it, but I'm going to give you a little bit more, probably extra details than some of the previous episodes on a couple of different things, just because I did a deep dive on this topic it's probably a couple of years ago now. I spent a few months really reading all of the research out there because that's sometimes stuff that I do when I'm interested in something, want to see if there's a way that I can better help my patients, offer new ways to serve them and look after them in the clinic, or have them do things at home on their own to help themselves out as well. So we'll talk about all the scientific findings of what it was that I came across, and then we'll also talk about the best practices. So I'm not just spitting a bunch of numbers at you, but more so that you can kind of go, okay, well, so what? You've thrown all these numbers and studies at me, but what do I do with it, right? I got a good buddy of mine. He's a PhD researcher, and he often calls that the so what factor, right? So you throw all these numbers around, but what does that actually mean in terms of helping you apply that? So anyways, that's what we're going to be getting at in this episode. And I guess we'll start out by talking about where does this all come from? And again, a couple of years ago, I wrote a blog post for a wonderful company that I used to write some blogs for. Blogging seems to be kind of going by the wayside these days, so unfortunately I'm not doing it as much as I used to. But I was really curious about learning about all the vibration therapy out there and using vibrations to heal up the body, help it recover quicker from exercise and workouts. Did it have effects for healing the body in certain capacities? So heard a lot about it, and I dabbled with it a little bit, but decided to really stick my nose into the research for a few months. And that's kind of where it all came to. So then I wrote an article for this wonderful company called Simply Faster. Great website if you want to check them out. Simpli faster.com. And in it, I kind of broke down all the research and cited a bunch of the research as well, which, by the way, all the research that I kind of mentioned and parameters I mentioned today, I'll see if I can include a little Google Doc sheet in the, in the description section of like kind of the podcast episode. So you can look at all these different bits of research. But if you do want to read the blog article or see kind of some of the research that I listed there, you can head over to simplyfaster.com and then just in the search box, type in vibration therapy and it'll be the first article that pops up. But we'll kind of do a rehash of that blog article and just kind of talk about the practical takeaways that not just athletes can get out of it, because that's kind of what the article was written for at the time, is a little bit more for athletes and performance, but we'll kind of expand upon that today with kind of covering the grounds of the vibration therapy effects from kind of more than just the athletic perspective. So anyways, the whole reason why we're doing this is we got a problem to solve here. And that problem is, basically, I guess if we want to call it a problem, which I think we could, there's always a lot of new technology out there on the market that's really claiming to help improve athletic performance or to reduce pain or improve athletic performance, help you recover quicker, yada, yada, yada. I think that's kind of something we're all familiar with at this point. And so vibration therapy is really no different, where it's been claimed to have a lot of benefits behind its use. Helps, faster recovery this, helps bone mineral density that. But does it? So we'll have to talk about if anything that's valid or if it's a little bit overhyped. And then from there, we're really going to kind of look at that. So we go, okay, well, is it a waste of your money? Or is it something that's good use of your money or so-so use of your money? Talk about all that. And then I suppose as well, we should talk about, is any of it even safe? Because if something's effective in terms of helping you get out of pain or move better, but it comes at a pretty high risk or does really kind of reduce your health in the long run, it's probably not all that safe. But, if it's not a waste of money and it is safe, then how do we get the most out of it, right? How is it that we're going to really tap into its therapeutic effects? So we're going to be looking at that and solving kind of these problems in a sense as we work our way through this episode. And then there's one special note that I think we should really look at here as we kind of get into this. And that's basically that if you've ever seen a lot of people these days use kind of what we call, massage guns, like these little kind of handheld gun-looking devices that pulsate up and down onto someone's skin for different therapeutic effects. There's one special note we'll make about that real quick, because in this episode, if we kind of look at this in a technical sense, that massage gun therapy that people use is technically not vibration therapy. If we look at it in a technical sense, percussion therapy is what we would call using a massage gun, where there's a percussive force that's kind of moving onto and off your skin. And it's really kind of has a separation and then striking of the skin. We call it percussion therapy. Now, with vibration therapy, technically not the same, because vibration therapy means that you have a device that's in contact with your skin the whole time. And it's never leaving. And we'll kind of talk about, what are vibrations in the first place? We'll get after that in a moment. But the special note that we're just starting out with here is that technically these are two different interventions. And it's worth noting that maybe the effects of percussion therapy are quite similar or the same to vibration therapy. I didn't look into that a ton, and I don't know how much we know about the similarities between the two in terms of the finest physiologic changes and details that we could explore there. But they're probably similar in some ways. But as we start out, just so you know, we're technically talking about vibrations here, not percussion. But nonetheless, just so you know, I do like them both. I think vibration therapy can be great in a lot of instances. And I do think percussion therapy using the massage guns and all that can be quite beneficial as well. So anyways, let's start with the big takeaway here. And then we can really kind of go back to some of the other kind of concepts and work our way through there. But just so you know, the big takeaway of this whole vibration thing, rather than keep you in suspense until the very end, I feel let's kind of throw some of the main findings at you right away and then pick it apart from there. So ultimately with vibration therapy, we still have a bit more that we need to figure out with the very fine details of how we get the most out of this intervention, if you will. We've discovered a lot over the years, but again, there's still some more things we got to figure out. But no, in all fairness, we still don't fully know how gravity works. At least that's my understanding. We clearly know that it does work, and vibration therapy is the same way. There's a lot we know about it, but a couple of things that we don't. But, at this point in time, there's enough scientific evidence out there to warrant the use of vibration therapy for various applications. And this is especially true since it is really deemed to be a safe activity or safe intervention with low risk of adverse or kind of unwanted side effects. So we got a pretty safe intervention as long as we're being pretty reasonable with it. So that's always a good thing. And then, right now, with what we know about vibration therapy, we likely want to consider that it's worth each individual kind of taking the time needed to become familiar with the intervention, to know how it's tolerated for their body to ensure maximal success. Because it might just be a case that it's a little bit different for everyone. So in that room, there's room to play around with this intervention for sure. So that's kind of the big takeaway, but let's kind of now redirect and even talk about what is vibration therapy and what are vibrations, and then talk about what it's supposed to do to help the body out, and we'll go from there. So ultimately, if we look at kind of the definition of a vibration, vibrations are what we call oscillations, which are a back and forth like quivering motion. So back and forth, kind of do. And you really think about the oscillation. That's basically what a vibration is in a simplistic sense anyways. So then a vibration device, well, that's typically an electric motor that has what we call an eccentric or uneven load around its shaft, so that when it spins, it allows it to produce oscillations as the uneven load spins around the shaft. So a couple of different ways we could think about that, but a great one in a sense, if you think about, I remember as I was a kid, sometimes we'd wash our clothes and the washing machine would just kind of start shaking, violently. And as a kid, I didn't really know why, but then I realized, well, you got all this wet mass of clothing spinning around kind of, I guess, the drum of the washing machine. But if too much of the clothing got shifted to one side, well, that produced much more mass that was kind of not centered in a manner so that when the machine spun around, it would ultimately really wind up causing the washing machine to shake all over the place. And you can kind of think of that's what vibration therapy is doing. We're putting more end around one end of a shaft, and then as that shaft spins around, it really kind of creates that oscillation as it's spinning around. And that's ultimately kind of how we're going to think about what a vibration therapy device does for producing vibrations into the body. So in that regard, vibration therapy, basically it means that we're referring or talking about placing a device on the skin and then having the physical impulses that are generated from the vibration move through the body. So that's ultimately kind of what we're talking about when we talk about using a vibration therapy device. So then the next question becomes, okay, well, what's that really supposed to do to the body itself? What types of effects does it have? And I'm glad you asked, or maybe you didn't, but I'm going to pretend like you did. So the premise here is that with vibration therapy is ultimately rooted in its ability to change or improve various aspects of physiologic function within the body, particularly for the neuromuscular system. So the neuromuscular system, just in case if you're not familiar with that term, neuromuscular system refers to the interaction between the nerves in our body and the muscles that they communicate with. So if we're thinking about skeletal muscles, which are the muscles that, the average person is most familiar with, biceps muscle and pectoral muscles, leg muscles, and all that. Well, those muscles have nerves that basically send impulses into the muscle to allow the muscle to work. Those are electrical impulses that go into the muscle. those electrical impulses make the fibers contract, and that's how we produce movement. Now, additionally, you also get impulses that move out of the muscle up into the spinal cord and into the brain, and it's kind of a two-way street in that regard. We won't get into all of those details right now, but that's kind of the neuromuscular system. So you've got the light bulbs being the muscle, if you will, and then the wires that go to the light bulb being the nerves. You think about it that way, I suppose. Probably not a bad way to think about it. So if we kind of keep talking about, well, how is this all supposed to work? In a nutshell, we're talking about vibrational stimuli acting as a signaling mechanism that can excite and enhance various aspects of this neuromuscular system. So exciting the neuromuscular system, in a sense, just means changing its ability to fire impulses, changing the ability for how muscles are kind of awakened and alert, and a few other things like that, in a basic sense. So if we kind of break this out into a couple of different categories, we can talk about using these kind of vibrational stimuli to excite and enhance various aspects of physiologic functioning within the body so that we improve our physical performance. So in that regard, we're talking about enhancing various muscle characteristics, right? How quickly or efficiently can a muscle contract, or changing the local environment of the muscle so that's got a little more blood flow in it, these kind of types of changes. Now, we can also use all that when we talk about those things for not just improving physical performance, but augmenting or improving or accelerating exercise recovery. So if you think about, you do a big workout, muscles are sore the next day. Well, it turns out that if you use vibration therapy, you can actually reduce a lot of that muscle soreness that you might otherwise get. So we'll talk about that later on in the episode, where we talk about the ability to reduce delayed onset muscle soreness and these types of things. And we can also use vibration therapy in some ways to accelerate injury recovery. So decreasing pain within an area that's been injured, decreasing swelling, improving range of motion, much more than just that. But those are some of the ways that we can actually use this vibrational stimuli to better talk to and communicate with the body in a way to help it get more done, more taken care of. So I think that's pretty cool. Hopefully you do too. So really, ultimately it's believed that the musculoskeletal structures, so when we talk about that, we're kind of just talking about muscle fibers and a few other things we don't have to worry about the details of, but just all the components of these muscular structures, they respond to vibrational stimuli in a way that modulates or regulates or changes the muscle's tone in a way that allows it to what we would say accommodate to the vibrational waves it's experiencing. So that might sound a little convoluted, so let's talk about muscle tone real quick. Now, muscle tone is just basically the amount of tension that a muscle has, or its resistance to movement. You can also think about it in that way. And muscle tone is pretty important because it's how we kind of hold our bodies upright when we're sitting or when we're standing. There's some kind of permanent state of tension that a muscle has. If a muscle goes completely wet noodle limp, which we call flaccid, well, then the muscle's kind of useless in a sense, and we can't stand or hold posture or anything like that. And so when we change muscle tone, ultimately that's what allows us to move. So if you had every muscle in your body rock hard, you'd be stiff as a board. And if you're standing and then shut every single muscle off completely, you'd fall to the ground like a wet spaghetti noodle. And that's all because changes of the muscle's tone. And that's what we can do with vibrational stimuli here in some regard. So we'll get into that a bit more in a minute. But again, like I said, we're kind of going into the weeds today a little bit, but just ultimately keep in mind that the hardcore details of all of these specific effects, they're really outside the scope of this podcast. But if you do want to learn more, again, I'll put the references in like a Google Doc in the description of this podcast episode, or you can go to Simply Faster and read the article I wrote there, and all the references are listed at the end, and then you can really geek out on all those papers. So keep that in mind. But okay, so when we keep talking about the specific mechanisms here, we're going to talk about improving our physical performance and augmenting injury recovery, all that type of stuff, augmenting exercise recovery. But really, when we're kind of boiling down these different components, there's always a few unique changes we're making here throughout the body. So The first one is that we're going to increase intramuscular temperature within the muscle. So intra within muscular muscle, changing the temperature. And that works by kind of the changes we make to the local circulatory system. But there's some pretty good things that will make happen. We basically warm up the muscle by increasing its temperature. Talk about that in a moment. We're also going to talk about the increased metabolic rate that has been noted when we activate muscles through vibrational therapy. So metabolic rate meaning how much energy, these kind of muscles and all the cellular components are having to expend at any given point in time. And then we're going to talk about how we can use this kind of vibrational stimuli to even reduce myofascial pain. Now, myofascial pain, what is that? That's ultimately just a condition of the muscles that's really kind of characterized by what we would call a regional pain within the muscle. So everyone's familiar with the muscle, those contractile fibers that help us move, or within the fascia, which is this saran wrap-like tissue that covers the muscle, or even just kind of surrounding tissue, other soft tissue in the area. So let's not worry too much about those details, but we'll talk about some of these specific mechanisms in a minute, because I think you might be pretty kind of excited to hear about what we've found with some of this vibrational therapy. Okay, so let's quickly talk just about kind of a couple more of these mechanisms, and we'll kind of get into some really neat stuff after that. So vibrations basically provide mechanical stimulation to specific sensory receptors within the skin, muscles, and tendons. So when we just talked about all these kind of unique changes we've made, it's basically how we're doing it. We're taking this mechanical stimulation from the vibrations being produced by this machine, and then it's really kind of landing upon these different sensory receptors that we have throughout various tissues in our body, like the skin, muscles, and even the tendons. And with that, it's largely believed that exposure to these vibrations triggers what we call a neurogenic reflex. We'll talk about that in a moment. But that when this happens and it's combined with other muscular responses, we basically activate a reflex known as a tonic vibration reflex. So the tonic vibration reflex, honestly, I don't know tons about it, and I'd say it's probably not worth going into. But ultimately, just to give you a little bit of a definition here, it's basically the tonic vibration reflex is a sustained contraction of a muscle that is experienced, or let me try that again. It's a sustained contraction of a muscle subjected to vibration. And so this reflex is caused by vibratory activation of what we call muscle spindles, which are a special type of kind of muscle fiber that basically measure stretch within a muscle. Now, this is where I'm probably going down in the weeds too much. So if I'm losing you here, don't worry. We'll bail out of the weeds here really quick. For anyone who wants to know, we're talking about this activation of muscle spindles that basically kind of create this tonic vibration reflex. Just so anyone who wants to know, a muscle spindle is basically a unique type of structure within our muscles that it's a type of sensory organ that is within skeletal muscle. And what it does is it detects changes in the length of the muscle or the rate of change within a muscle. And so it basically in that regard, it acts as a stretch receptor that kind of sends a message to the central nervous system with information about the muscle's position and kind of how it's moving. So now these muscle spindles are pretty important because they do play a really important role in something that we call proprioception. So proprioception is the ability for the brain to understand the position that a joint or part of the body is in compared to the rest of the body itself. So proprioception meaning that, I can close my eyes, and then as I do that, I can basically hold my elbow to 90 degrees and know that my elbow is in 90 degrees without needing to see it happen. I can feel the position that it's in. That's what we would call proprioception. And so all of this muscle spindle stuff helps to kind of modulate what we call the muscle's tone and help with kind of, our posture and kind of how our muscles are basically keeping us upright or allowing us to move for that matter. So this is where we could get really geeky into things that we call intrafusal fibers, which is what a muscle spindle is, or an extrafusal fiber, which is the type of muscle fiber that most people are familiar with when we think of a muscle contracting. But again, I don't really want to go down that road right now. So in short, we can say that all of this stuff that we just mentioned, intrafusal muscle fibers with, and the muscle spindles activating, basically what this does is this produces what we would call an involuntary increase in force output of the muscle itself. Again, this is all happening through what we call alpha motor neurons, which, again, I'm sorry if I'm going into the weeds a bit too much, but an alpha motor neuron, just so anyone wants to know, that's the type of neuron that talks to the muscle fibers that make a muscle contract and allow us to move. Gamma motor neurons are the type of neurons that innervate the muscle spindles themselves, but shut up, Jim. You're kind of just going way off the rails with this. So I apologize. So the non-technical version, let's go back to kind of more plain layman's speak with all this. So all of what I've just said, which I apologize, I rambled horrendously through, just means that a muscle's exposure to the right type and amount of vibration results in an increase in a couple of things. So we use vibrational stimuli to change the muscle's firing rate. So how quickly nerve impulses are kind of hitting the muscle and how quickly the muscle can respond by producing contractions. We also use vibrational stimuli to change the coordination within the muscle. So how the muscle is able to kind of carry out its tasks involved with movement. And we can use vibrational stimuli to basically increase what we call central motor command, or the brain's ability to better communicate with the muscles kind of back and forth. So just think of it in that basic extent. And so it's believed that all of this really occurs through vibration therapy, with vibration therapy delivering these effects through 4 different parameters. So we'll talk about that in a moment, but vibration therapy kind of does some of these geeky things we've mentioned. And don't worry, we'll get into talking about how we get the most out of this and what does this even mean for an average person or an athlete. We'll break that all down. So I just mentioned that vibration therapy has 4 specific parameters. This is going a bit into the weeds again, because oftentimes with vibration therapy devices, which we'll talk about in a minute, you can't really change many of these parameters anyways, but for anyone who does want to know, vibration in the therapy that we're utilizing here really consists of 4 different parameters that can change kind of how vibration is delivered. So we'll quickly gloss through these. Your first parameter is what we call the frequency. So that's how many oscillations we produce with the device every second. And we measure that in hertz. So frequency, that's kind of the main one that most people would kind of be familiar with if they thought of vibration therapy. We can talk about amplitude, which is just the magnitude of the vibration. That one you can't change much on most vibration devices, at least that I'm aware of. We can talk about the displacement, which is the actual size of the oscillation, basically measured in millimeters. And then the fourth one is the duration. So how long do we expose ourselves to these vibrational stimuli? And again, you can measure that in minutes or seconds or anything of the sort. And that's going to be important because in a little bit here, we'll talk about, are there ideal time parameters associated for vibration therapy? So that being said, the other thing that we'll kind of quickly dive into here is the different types of vibration therapy, because there's ultimately 2 ways that vibration therapy can produce its effects within the body, and it's classified into 2 distinct categories. So the first one is what we would call whole body vibration, and that is just basically meaning that we're trying to get changes going throughout the entire body, which is typically done by standing or sitting on a vibration platform. So maybe you've seen these in gyms, kind of big plates or kind of big looking units that you stand on or sit on, and it's kind of shaking someone around a little bit or vibrating them around. That's what we would call whole body vibration. And it produces what we call direct and indirect effects. We'll get into that a bit more in a moment. And then we have what's called local vibration. This is the second of the 2 ways that we can kind of classify our vibration therapy. And this is typically referring to using a small kind of handheld vibration device for a specific body part. And that produces what we call direct effects. So we talk about direct effect. What we're talking about there is, really using that vibration directly in the area that it's stimulating the skin and the body. So the part that we want to treat or manage or change gets applied with the vibration device right to that part of the body. But these indirect effects, I should say, that's where with whole body vibration, we're basically creating changes elsewhere in the body, even though that part of the body that's creating changes is not being directly exposed to or directly in contact with the vibration source. And so typically with indirect effects, you're really only going to see that through whole body vibration. But as we kind of go along, a couple of things that I want to keep mentioning here is that as we start to pick apart the research here, I really want you just to know that the research studies out there typically can use direct or indirect vibration. And that's important to know if you're looking at the research, just because we've found that there can be differences between direct or indirect vibration therapy with this kind of whole body or this local therapy. So if you're ever looking at the research, try and figure out which type of vibration they're doing. Is it whole body? Is it direct or kind of local? And then when they're talking about the changes, are they talking about that from a indirect kind of whole body response? Or are they talking about directly to the area that it was applied? So it's worth kind of keeping all that in mind. And then it's also worth mentioning here that it's believed that the mechanisms of action between whole body or local vibration are the same or even very similar. But it's possible that how local and whole body or direct and indirect vibration achieves their responses could be somewhat different. We ultimately don't know. It doesn't matter too much for most people out there. But if you're someone who's geeky or keen to know some of these details, just keep some of that stuff in mind. But let's look at whole body vibration here real quick. That's the more commonly studied one and the one that probably people are most familiar with in terms of kind of seeing some of these mechanisms in action. So whole body vibration is referring to delivering the effects of vibrational stimuli throughout the entire body, which we just talked about. And that's typically through a platform. So a device you would stand on or sit on. So it's a larger device. So trying to kind of stimulate the entire body. And this is the method between the whole body versus kind of local vibration therapy. This is the method that's been studied more and can yield effects reaching beyond the local part in contact with the device. So oftentimes in research, you're going to find that, again, whole body vibration, you come across more studies involving that rather than just the local or applying vibration to one specific body part. So when we look at the whole body effects of what happens when you stand or sit on a vibration platform, there's a couple of things that they've routinely found in the research that I think is pretty interesting. So, the big ones are that they've kind of found changes in hormonal levels for different types of hormones. So, hormones like growth hormone and testosterone, they have found to change in concentration within the kind of blood and body after doing vibration. Now, they've also found decreases in a hormone called cortisol. So, if you think of growth hormone and testosterone, there'd be hormones that we consider anabolic, or they help to build tissue. Cortisol is a little bit what we call catabolic. It breaks down tissue. So we kind of have an increase in the building types of hormones and a decrease in the breakdown types of hormones. They've also found that it changes what we call anabolic gene expression in tendons. So gene signaling that kind of helps to build and promote health within tendons. And again, there's plenty more effects and probably a lot more that we haven't even discovered yet, but not just kind of some of the kind of big important ones that I think most people would be interested in. Now, when we talk about local vibration effects, we're moving away from whole body and into the kind of local vibration. This refers to delivering vibration to a specific part of the body and not just the entire body itself. So this is where, again, if you're using a vibrating foam roller, for example, one of these kind of foam rolling devices used to massage tissue and kind of help with muscle tension and myofascial pain, well, you can get these foam rollers that kind of vibrate as you do that. And theoretically, that makes a bit of a change to the local environment of the tissue. And, it has been shown to produce favorable outcomes for performance and injury rehabilitation, but it has been studied much less than whole body vibration. So we've got to take all that into account when we're looking at all of this. So now with these local devices, there's kind of a couple different ways you can do this with these different devices. So we'll quickly kind of run through some of this here. But the good news about using local devices rather than these whole body platform devices that you sit on or stand on is that they're much more practical and cost effective. So some of the ones that I own is you can have things like a vibrating travel roller. You can have a vibrating massage ball, and the difference between a roller and a ball, just being that a vibrating ball, you can get it in kind of different areas of your body, a bit more kind of pectoral region or a couple other areas that might be tough with more cylindrical based vibratory device. And you even have wearable types of garments these days that kind of stick a patch on, and this little kind of pack or battery will kind of buzz locally over the area. So the folks at Hyperice make something like this called the Venom Go. Put a big sticky pad on a part of your body, and then this little device will both produce heat and also vibration to the area. It's a pretty cool little device, quite like mine for using it under the right circumstances. So those are kind of the different devices that we can use. Now, let's talk about some of these research findings here. So keep in mind that there's still plenty more to learn, but there are promising results here for the various aspects of kind of how the human body functions. So we're quickly going to look at muscle performance characteristics with what they found in the literature. We're going to look at improving what we call proprioception, or that ability to determine kind of the position that our joints and body parts are in space or compared to the rest of the body. And then we'll talk about injury prevention and rehabilitation. And then we'll talk about bone mineral density. That's a really interesting one. And even some recovery aspects with delayed onset muscle soreness, or DOMS, you might hear it. This is kind of where we'll kind of try and start applying all this into actionable steps for you. So let's talk about muscle performance first. So there's been studies that have looked at various characteristics of how muscles contract and function when exposed to these vibrational stimuli. And so they've looked at things in the research like ballistic contraction. So can we get a muscle to produce force at a much quicker rate if we expose it to vibration? They've looked at the ability to use vibrational stimuli to help a muscle become resistant to fatigue. They've looked at using vibration therapy to improve maximal force output, or how hard that muscle can contract and how much force it can produce. They've looked at plenty more as well. Those are just some of the big ones that I think most people would be interested in. And ultimately, the results tend to be favorable here and significant in some regards, but not all studies produce these findings. So that's the big one to keep in mind here. And the differences are, they could be due to differences in study design or even the parameters utilized with the vibration devices. So, but pretty favorable stuff overall. So the takeaway here is that most studies that have looked at improving a muscle's performance have mostly utilized local vibration therapy. So using it just kind of on one part of the body rather than the full body. And if we want to look at the details of that, they have found improvements to kind of the muscle's performance when they use a device that has a frequency between 20 to 60 hertz. Now, again, if you buy a local vibration device, you probably can't change the frequency too much, but sometimes there's different settings that you can select, and you might find in the instruction manual, they give you information for the low intensity setting versus the higher intensity setting. They might have the frequencies listed in there. But 20 to 60 hertz seems to be the sweet spot of the frequency for enhancing muscle performance. The amplitude, which I don't think you can really change on most local devices, ranges from about 1 to 2 millimeters. And then typically they find shorter sessions to stimulate the muscle. So 1 to 5 minutes they tend to find works really, really good. So I guess that would mean that if you're going to try and warm up your legs a bit more to get a little bit more power before you do workout or going for a sprint or anything like that, 5 minutes per leg, or 2.5 minutes per leg, somewhere around there might seem to be the sweet spot. And that's probably the one most people are interested in a lot, muscle performance. Now, if we look at proprioception, again, that's just the brain's ability to accurately determine the position of joints and limbs in space compared to the rest of the body. So I talked about, I can close my eyes, put my elbow to 90 degrees and feel that it's at 90 degrees without seeing it. That's proprioception. So proprioception and the effects that vibration therapy can produce is most often studied with the ankle. And it's most often studied for rehabilitation, or after the injury, trying to get it rehabilitated or getting it better. And this is because proprioception, we know, is greatly impaired in the ankle after an ankle injury. So you sprain your ankle and proprioception gets really mucked up, where your brain has a harder time feeling, even subconsciously is what we're talking about here, the position that the kind of ankle is in space. It predisposes you to injuries and all this other type of stuff. So if we can improve that proprioception after an injury, it tends to be a pretty good step to take. And so with that proprioception, they've ultimately found that of the some studies that have looked at, or the few studies that have looked at this, they tend to use direct vibration right to the ankle, so the bottom of the foot and that kind of stuff, to enhance proprioception. And they found that it can be helpful, but not a lot of data to go on at this time. And it's been studied through different populations altogether, so elderly populations and young populations. And it does show promise for enhancing proprioception, but when I did this deep dive a couple of years ago, the current scientific consensus was that more research needs to be done. So, in that regard, if we kind of talk about the injury rehab and prehab, so rehab being rehabilitating injury, prehabilitation meaning we're trying to prevent an injury from taking place, there's numerous studies basically utilizing whole body vibration that have found favorable effects on improving muscle flexibility and perceived stiffness. Now, in that regard, we talk about muscle flexibility and how stiff we perceive our muscles to be. That can fall into the category of how does that feel after we've had an injury, or how does it feel before we've had an injury? Because changing these types of characteristics can help us prevent injury, but can also help us rehabilitate after an injury. So there's less literature to go on at this time when we're talking about direct vibration therapy to these types of situations. But there's a couple of things that they found that I thought were pretty interesting. So there has been one study out there that found utilizing a device called a Swiss ring at 20 hertz with an amplitude ranging from 1 to 6 millimeters at a 2-minute duration did produce some notable improvements in ankle and hamstring mobility. Downside is that the Swiss ring that I looked at online, assuming this is the right one, is very expensive. So probably not the most practical thing for most people to be using. But it does stand to reason that other direct vibration devices out there could produce similar effects if you use the same parameters. Can't say that for certain, but point being is that we can use vibration just to change some of the characteristics of the muscles in ways that can help prevent a few injuries, but also treat injuries after we've taken a beating to the area that's injured. So the ideal parameter settings and combinations with indirect vibration therapy aren't really as clearly established when we compare that to direct vibration therapy. But typically, using a vibration device to kind of prevent injury or rehabilitate injuries by changing muscle characteristics of kind of that perceived stiffness or tension, well, ultimately, we're going to need a longer duration of vibration exposure, typically greater than 10 minutes with a higher frequency. But there's not much of a clear consensus in the literature at this time. But some of these studies kind of find, well, shorter bursts of vibration therapy, 1 minute to 5 minutes, which we kind of talked about a few minutes before for the ability to enhance muscle force output and all that. Shorter stimulation seems to be good for enhancing that. Longer stimulation tends to be better for calming the muscle down, getting it to kind of down regulate so the tone or tension drops and we get that kind of decrease in stiffness. So it's kind of what we're finding with some of that stuff. Now, the interesting one, just to quickly keep on rifling through here, is what we call bone mineral density. So this is the one that's probably the most well studied out of any of the aspects of vibration therapy. And most studies have basically used whole body vibration when looking at the ability to change bone mineral density. And it's generally found that the most studies that are using whole body vibration have kind of general favorable improvements in bone characteristics, which means we're getting better bone health if we are exposing the body to vibration therapy. Now, this is really important because as we age, we can get conditions that we call osteopenia, osteoporosis. Osteoporosis means we've hit a certain threshold for bones becoming brittle and weak. Osteopenia basically meaning that we're on our way to that happening. And so we offset that through vibration therapy with the primary mechanism here being believed to improve bone circulation in a manner where we're increasing the overall nutritional supply to the bone tissue. So there's something about these vibrational stimuli that are increasing bone circulation, dropping off kind of more critical nutrients to the bone or delivering those critical nutrients to keep the bone tissue healthy and strong. So they've also found that with that kind of whole body vibration therapy, that it's been shown to improve various aspects of what we call osteogenic differentiation, while also reducing osteoclast formation. Now, osteogenic differentiation, you can just think about that as the bone's ability to kind of produce the right structures and kind of substances that it needs. And osteoclast formation, just meaning these osteoclasts are the structures that help to break down bone. And so if we can reduce osteoclast formation, we're therefore reducing the bone's kind of ability to kind of break bone components down. Kind of layman's terms of thinking about it in that manner. And so as I alluded to a moment before, improving bone mineral density is particular interest for people who are combating osteopenia and osteoporosis. These are these nasty conditions where if the bones are too weak and brittle, we're exposed to the body breaking down. And then this is the type of stuff you fall over and you break a hip because the bone wasn't strong enough to withstand the force of that impact. You can get nasty conditions in your spine called compression fractures. That becomes common as we age if we get these kind of brittle bones. So any way we can offset that is pretty helpful. Now, again, strength training and doing appropriate exercises, probably your best bet, but it seems like vibration therapy has some promise as well. So the takeaway with bone mineral density is that the vast majorities of studies who have looked at whole body vibration to enhance kind of these bone mineral characteristics are using a vibration frequency from about 30 to 50 hertz, somewhere around there. They're using a session duration that's typically between 10 to 20 minutes. So, a little bit of time you got to sit on that vibration platform or stand on it, but it's not like it's uncomfortable. It does take a bit of time, it would seem. Most of these studies are using a session frequency between daily to about 3 times per week. So it means that, again, you're probably going to have to be going to a gym where you easily can have access to one of these and use it at least 3 times per week. But hey, if you got the means, then go for it. But important to note that when they find these kind of good solid changes in bone mineral characteristics, that these studies are doing this for anywhere from 11 to 80 weeks. Most of the studies I looked at were about 20 weeks in length. So this really has to become part of your lifestyle in terms of something that's convenient where, hey, I go to the gym 3 times a week anyways, and there's a vibration platform device right there. So sure, why not? But you're kind of be in this for the long haul, it would seem, in order to make some of these changes. Now, the other one we'll mention real quick is muscle soreness, what we call delayed onset muscle soreness. And this is that phenomenon that occurs where we work out and then the muscles that we worked out or exercised become stiff or sore or painful anywhere from about 24 to 72 hours after intense physical activity. It's a natural phenomenon, but it's certainly kind of uncomfortable to go through. But this is a big interest and kind of big implication for athletes and individuals looking to recover faster after an exercise session or a sports event, because the quicker you can recover, the quicker you can get on to your next training session or your next game without, kind of having poor performance because you're too sore or stiff. So with the different studies that have looked at this, vibration therapy with a frequency around 80 hertz seems to be ideal for reducing sensations of pain from delayed onset muscle soreness. And really, again, it's the exposure of local vibration therapy at about 50 hertz that can offer some neat changes for the body for reducing this delayed onset muscle soreness. And the studies I've looked at, they used about 50 hertz to the quadriceps muscles. And then they kind of tested this out by doing a series of what we call eccentric exercises, which is a unique way to make the muscle work really hard at a controlled lengthening of the muscle. And they found that kind of this exposure to the quadriceps muscles, even before doing some of these intense eccentric exercises, reduced pain perception and delayed onset muscle soreness after. So it's pretty interesting. So a little bit more on that. There's kind of different studies that have looked at all this. So one study did involve using whole body vibration therapy at 40 hertz. And this study found significant decreases in calf and gluteal, or think hip muscle for gluteal, calf and hip soreness experienced by recreational runners who performed a bout of downhill treadmill running when compared to a control group. So basically running on kind of a downhill tread to mimic that downhill run. And that kind of taxes muscles a bit differently than if you're running on a flat surface. And again, they found that, they kind of basically were able to kind of reduce the overall amount of soreness that these runners had in their calf and gluteal muscles, which were working a bit harder than normal because they're running downhill. and kind of found that it had that significant decrease in delayed onset muscle soreness. So pretty interesting stuff. The takeaway is that utilizing vibration therapy for delayed onset muscle soreness tends to produce favorable results. So keep that in mind. And it may be that the most beneficial frequencies to do this range from about 40 to 80 hertz. Again, that's kind of a general range to work within. And then most studies that have found favorable outcomes for decreasing delayed onset muscle soreness utilize a duration of about somewhere between 1 to 10 minutes with direct vibration therapy. So this is a tricky thing because it's kind of, 1 to 10 minutes, that's a big range, but seems to be somewhere in there should work pretty good. And again, direct vibration meaning, I just did a big quadriceps workout, so front of my thigh muscles. Doing your vibration therapy on those muscles directly probably offer a decent bang for your buck. At least that's what it would seem. So best practices. Let's quickly talk about all of that. So like any other training or recovery modality, the more finely tuned the parameters are, the greater the positive effect or outcome that we can get. So think of all of this like taking a picture, in that the more in focus and clear the image is in the picture, the more obvious, what's in that photo becomes, because it's crystal clear, right? Now, a slightly blurry photo is better than nothing at all, but it's nowhere near as ideal as that kind of tack a sharp image. And so when we relay that concept of vibrational therapy, we know that the individual parameters for vibrational therapy can be, beneficial, but we don't know like the exact combination of parameter settings that leads to the best results. So, we don't know if it's more crucial to have 2 certain parameters completely dialed in rather than we need 4 parameters kind of dialed into somewhat specific kind of parameters. We just don't know. So there's a little bit more to be figured out with that. And then many studies you might look at, they utilize different parameters, which adds to the lack of clarity, or they don't even talk about all the parameters that they used. So that also makes it a bit tricky. Well, you got a favorable outcome, but what were the exact parameters? Or you didn't get a favorable outcome. Well, what were the parameters that you used? So, right now it's kind of a case of close is good enough when it comes to probably the best practices of utilizing vibrational therapy to help the body out. Now, what I'll quickly mention here in a moment are just kind of some general guidelines for incorporating vibration therapy into your pursuits for, optimizing your body's function and performance. Now, if we talk about vibration therapy from a pain perspective, best practices for that would indicate that both direct and indirect vibrational therapy have both shown to be effective for decreasing pain. Most studies with positive findings have used longer session length of about 20 to 45 minutes, with frequencies ranging from anywhere from 20 to 200 hertz. And so that's typically higher than performance-based interventions, but again, this is not set in stone here with any of this. So those are some of the parameters we might want to think about from a pain perspective. Now, best practices from a muscle performance perspective or neuromuscular performance is that if we want to improve force output, then a frequency of about 30 to 50 hertz is likely most optimal if you have the ability to finally dial in, that frequency, because you don't always have that ability to do that. Now, interestingly enough, this 30 to 50 hertz, this is the same frequency at which what we call a motor unit discharges within the body when we want to make muscles contract. So a motor unit is basically one motor neuron in all the muscle fibers that it innervates. And that's what we would call a motor unit. And that kind of operates at about a frequency of 30 to 50 hertz. So for improving muscle force output, vibration around that same frequency still works pretty good. Now, from that delayed onset muscle soreness best practice perspective, we basically want to be kind of thinking about doing our session length ranging in duration from 1 to 30 minutes, which is a wild kind of discrepancy in session time. But again, this is where we kind of run into we just don't know these kind of best parameters for some of these things. But it therefore stands to reason that if you're trying to decrease muscle soreness after you've done a workout, any duration between 1 to 30 minutes will likely be helpful. Again, assuming you're doing this directly to the areas that you're trying to reduce the soreness for. But again, we don't have lots of data at this time. Now, it has been reported that 80 hertz is the optimal frequency for reducing pain thresholds for delayed onset muscle soreness. But again, I don't know how much of that is set in stone versus just a couple of research papers I looked at. Now, overall with all of this, if the amplitude, if that's something that you can select, which I don't think you can on, at least not on many devices I've come across, amplitude should be kept around 1 to 4 millimeters. And that's kind of the range that most studies have looked at when, including the parameters within the study. But I don't know if you can select that on a lot of devices. I know that I really can't on my handheld devices anyway, so maybe you can on some of the larger whole body platforms. Now, shorter sessions, I had talked about this earlier, of less than 5 minutes tend to produce movements or improvements in muscle performance. And longer sessions tend to produce what we call inhibitory effects on muscle characteristics, making the muscle basically sleepy or a bit tired, if you want to think of it in that regard. But there's conflicting findings across a lot of these studies. So, I don't know how much we can read into that, especially when we have these kind of different vibration parameters that go along with all this. But in essence, if you're trying to kind of ramp up a muscle or excite it, probably a shorter duration, under 5 minutes, when we talk about the muscle characteristic side of things, not necessarily the delayed onset muscle soreness. Shorter sessions to kind of drop muscle shorter sessions to ramp up muscle activity and excitement, and longer ones to kind of make it sleepy and kind of inhibit the muscle. But there's still plenty more to figure out with all of this. But it would seem right now there's enough evidence to warrant the use of vibration for various applications. So it is the big reason why we can say that it's largely deemed to be a safe intervention with a very low risk of side effects. Now, that being said, I'm not telling you that you're perfectly safe to go out and use it. I mean, this is all for information purposes in this podcast, just so we're clear. But if you want to try it, talk with your doctor or take the risk yourself if you want to. But full disclosure, I'm never telling you what to do. If you got any questions, chat with someone about that who's qualified to help you out directly. But this is likely a case of each individual needing to take the time to become familiar with vibration therapy, to see how their body tolerates it, how it feels, and fine-tune it from there from an individualized perspective to get the most out of it. So what all that means is that if you see a vibration platform in the gym or you have access to a handheld device, maybe worth trying. But that being said, you're going to need to try it multiple times. And it's possible that you're going to need to do it like even a few dozen times to really kind of feel like there's maybe something changing for the better. But it's kind of all up in the air. So, don't read everything into these studies as meaning it's going to work for you or it'll even be perceptible. Some of these changes they find in these studies, they exist on paper when they analyze it, but you might not even be able to perceive it for that matter. So keep that in mind. But hey, I've rambled a ton in this episode. Appreciate you sticking around to the end if you did. And so if you did and you found anything of this kind of random, kind of somewhat incoherent kind of walkthrough on my part to be helpful, a review is always appreciated. And then, what's more important is that if you feel that anyone else could benefit from the contents in this episode or other episodes, feel free to share this or other episodes with them, just to kind of help make the world a bit of a stronger place, a little bit less of a painful place for anyone who can benefit. Not about me. It's about helping others. And that's what I'm striving to do here. So that being said, if you made it all the way to the end, thank you so much for sticking around. Hope you got something out of a lot of this kind of rambling that I did here. But nonetheless, I hope that you're doing good with all that you're up to. I want you to keep looking after yourselves, keep looking after one another, keep making great things happen, and I'll see you in the next episode.